Hello, Western Standard viewers. Today we are looking at one of the biggest resource stories in Canada in recent times and what it could mean for the country's control over its own mineral wealth. In September, the proposed $53 billion merger between Vancouver-based Teck Resources and British mining giant Anglo American was announced, making it the second largest mining deal in history. The proposed merger would create one of the world's largest copper producers headquartered in Vancouver, but with major foreign ownership and global influence. Now, local bands are raising the alarm, saying the deal moved ahead without their consultation. This merger raises the question, who really benefits from our resource wealth? Canadians or multinational corporations? Joining me is Maximilian Hess. He's the founder of London-based political risk firm Enmatena Advisory and an analyst of the mining sector with an interest in Anglo American's international operations. Max, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, David.
Well, right off the bat, Anglo American has a massive global reach with subsidiaries such as De Beers. If foreign mergers such as the one between them and Teck keep consolidating control over Canadian mines, do you think the country risks losing strategic control of its resource base to global finance?
I think that's precisely the issue at risk here. This is not only a question for Canada, but a question for the world today. We live in an era of resource nationalism where there's particularly intense competition between both companies and states over the future of a lot of these resources. In this proposed merger, that's one of the key factors that has Anglo American so interested in Teck, in particular for its copper assets. But as we've seen this be billed as a supposed merger of equals, it's actually Anglo American that will emerge with nearly 2/3 of the shares, and Canada would be losing one of its largest remaining mining companies on the Canadian listing, as the new listing would be in London with Anglo American's existing one. This would weaken Canada's leverage not only over control of its own assets, but in terms of its geoeconomic position in dealing with the future of these resources and resource competition between Canada and the United States, Canada and Europe, Canada and China, and so on and so forth.
Okay, well, previously De Beers operated in Canada through the Victor Diamond Mine project in Northern Ontario, and it was a project that faced major criticism for environmental damage and for failing to deliver promised benefits to local communities. Do you think that history should disqualify the company from future Canadian expansion?
I don't know if I would go quite so far as to say it should disqualify it from future Canadian expansion, but it does show that there needs to be additional attention paid to the company's past track record in Canada as well as elsewhere. De Beers is also currently in the process of being sold. Anglo American wants to remove it ultimately from the future company that it is creating here, and this comes amid a major downturn in the diamond prices. If you ask De Beers, their success story has always been helping the development of the country of Botswana. But we now see a real crisis in that country due to those low diamond prices, De Beers trying to get out at this time, and real questions over how that country is going to continue to develop, grow, and invest these resources. So it has a track record of getting out when the going gets tough and then leaving local authorities, whether they be in Ontario or whether they be in Botswana, to deal with the mess after.
Do you think this proposed merger as well could mark a moment where Canada shifts from being a resource nation to simply a resource platform for firms like Anglo American?
Well, in some ways, it has been a strength of Canada that it does have a relatively low-touch regulatory environment for the mining sector to attract global miners to come be based there and leave. But now they're considering leaving because other countries have engaged in similar kinds of competition and potentially would have even less regulatory oversight over them. Canada wants to ensure, however, that it has key regulatory oversight over its own domestic mining base in the future, and any move to bring the listing outside of Canada would have a real negative impact on that. I think that, Canadian mines will still continue to be profitable and Canada will still have a very large and thorough mining sector, but ultimately who controls it, whether at the corporate level or at the national level, are really at stake here.
Well, Canada promotes itself as well as a leader in responsible mining, yet much of its mineral sector is owned or financed by foreign interests. Do you think that undercuts the federal government's ability to align extraction with national or indigenous priorities?
It's a difficult balance to be struck for sure. I think Canada is genuinely a leader in these matters. The question here is whether it becomes weaker in it being able to exercise that influence going forward. So Canada has a better track record on that, certainly, than a lot of other regulatory environments do. But if this listing goes ahead and other Canadian resources continue to be sold out of Canadian majority ownership, then the ability for the Canadian authorities to decide how they want to shape the global mining sector going forward, and it will always be a global sector. It will always be that the products are mined in one place, sold in another, refined in often yet another. But Canada has had a important role in that, and in many ways a force for good compared to some of the other environments. This deal would risk undermining that.
And as well, if the federal government does approve this merger without indigenous consent, you do think that that could undermine Canada's credibility as an ethical source of critical minerals for the global market?
That is perhaps going one step too far. The questions around indigenous consent and the like vary, very heavily from country to country. I think Canada has been a leader in that model, and it has been a country that has shown that you can have a successful, profitable, and good growing mining sector when still taking local communities' concerns into account and ensuring that after projects are done, that the necessary costs are paid to ensure that the impacts on the landscape and on the livelihoods of the people are addressed. So Canada would weaken its position in terms of being able to set an example for others, is certainly how I would put it.
And also, do you think ongoing land disputes in places such as British Columbia deter capital investment in Canada's resource sector, or does clear consultation make projects less risky over the long term?
I think clear consultation makes projects less risky over the long term. Of course, you have very big differences in a state by state and a province by province approach, whether it be in Canada or the United States or elsewhere. In some ways, Canada has a federal system that allows a lot of decisions to be made locally by local governments. Of course, there will be disagreements between indigenous communities in certain areas and the provincial level government amongst them, but it allows that process to play out on that level rather than have a federal regulator say one rule applies for all. And I think that is very important.
And also, as well, how do you global investors balance Canada's political reliability against growing uncertainty around consultation and environmental compliance?
Well, I think one of the arguments that critics of reviewing the merger would be to say, Canada needs to join this global rush to deregulate, to, allow business to flourish and have that competition. I think those arguments miss the point, whereas that Canada is really an island of stability in the environment that we see now, where the United States is taking stakes in key mining companies. Both China and the United States are imposing controls on where certain products can be sold, whereas Canada is broadly very supportive of continued global trade on these matters. So Canada has brought in new powers to allow the government to review these kind of transactions. And the question is what is that review aiming to achieve? If that review is aiming to achieve priority for Canada's interests, and which that interest is a continued flourishing of the global market, then I think it is further evidence of that stability that investors have historically welcomed in Canada, rather than a sign that Canada is slipping down that same slope that the United States and China, for example, are.
And from an investor standpoint, is the greater long-term risk to Canada's mining sector overregulation or maybe underestimating Indigenous and environmental blowback?
Both are risks that any investor will certainly have to consider, and what may be a larger risk at one point or another changes very much from time to time. Today, it is this example of geoeconomic competition and states looking to bring resources under their control in a way that disadvantages others that is the primary risk. And that is what I think Canada should be focused on trying to address and mitigate here.
Well, thank you for your time, Max. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, David. It's been a pleasure.
For the Western Standard, this is David Winnick.